I am just your average backpacker who loves exploring. I've seen the snow-capped mountains of the Alps, the barren deserts of Africa, and all the natural beauties in between. However, the region I fell in love with is Southeast Asia. Every meal is a delight, the beer is cheap, and of course, the women are beautiful. I had recently arrived in Manila, and I did as all tourists do. I made my way to Makati City. I found myself a cheap pension house and partied the nights away, dancing to great music and losing myself in a sea of Red Horse and Tanduay. Finally, it came time to say goodbye to Manila, and I jumped on a plane to the Visayas region. I spent my time travelling from Boracay to Calibo to Iloilo to Bacolod to Cebu, and finally to Siquijor. I found myself climbing out of a brightly coloured jeepney. Its bright pinks and purples caused my eyes to ache whenever I looked at it. My feet eventually touched the dusty ground, and it took me a moment to take in where I was. I found myself in the city of Siquijor. It wasn't far from the ocean, and the smell of salt and fish hung in the air. It was very refreshing, especially after leaving the pollution of Manila. Azure skies greeted me like an old friend. It was beautiful. Dark, majestic trees surrounded the town. They seemed to be protecting the city from something unseen. Rows of tiny houses lined the streets, mostly traditionally made with thick bamboo poles hoisting them off the ground, protecting them from the flooding rains that normally swept through here during the typhoon season. Smaller sections of bamboo were split in half to make the walls, and dark brown nipa leaves nestled on the roof. I always found it surprising how they didn't blow away with the slightest gust of wind. I'd come to Siquijor in search for the famous faith healers. These healers were known for their ability to cure any sickness through their healing massages, but the first thing I needed to do was find some place to rest. "Excuse me, miss," I asked a young woman who was standing nearby. She turned around, her chestnut hair gracefully swayed in the air as she turned to face me. Dark chocolate eyes stared at me with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. She stood there smiling at me, but I could tell instantly from the look on her face she had absolutely no idea what I'd said to her. Returning her smile, I placed my hands together next to my head, and I pretended to sleep. She started to giggle loudly. She reached out and took my hand and started to drag me into the busy streets. We weaved in and out of the streets, dodging tricycles, jeepneys, people, until we got to our destination, and she stopped in front of a pension house. Its grey cement walls looked intimidating. There was razor wire on top. It looked more like a prison than a pension house. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a 100-peso note and handed it to the woman. She said something in her dialect, and without warning she turned and disappeared back into the throngs of people and vanished out of sight. After a few days at the pension house and travelling around Siquijor, I decided it was time to leave and pursue the faith healers. I asked the receptionist where I could find a faith healer. She turned, looking at me sternly, and said, "Sir, you shouldn't go looking for the Mangkukulam. They are dangerous." Her voice quivered as she spoke to me. I assured her it'd be fine and insisted that she tell me where I needed to go. "Go to Katabun. There is a cave in the mountains. You'll find her there," she said. Her voice betrayed her concern for me. I found myself in a small village in the mountains. The people in this area were very poor. Their houses were cobbled together with scraps of wood and bamboo. Small children were playing. Their clothes were worn and tattered, but they were happier than the children that I saw back home, who always had their faces buried in either their phones or their tablets. They kicked a ball over to me. Its worn leather spun in the dirt as it started to come towards me. I took a few minutes to forget about the pressures of the world and play with them. I don't know how many foreigners they'd seen, but they laughed and pointed each time I did something silly. It was an amazing feeling. Soon, the sun was starting to set in the sky, and the perfect blues had faded to shades of orange and pink. I knew it was time to get moving. Following the receptionist's directions, her words led me to a small track that was surrounded by shrubs and tall trees. Pushing forward, the sun had now sunken below the horizon, and it was getting harder to see. There was a rumbling in the distance. I could hear millions of litres of water crashing into the ground. As the path cleared, there was a waterfall in front of me. The silver stream was flowing from high above, and it was crashing down into the dark, deep abyss. Next to the stream, there was a small opening. A faint amber glow escaped into the night. I felt in the pit of my stomach that I shouldn't be here, that I was trespassing. There was a faint scuffling noise coming from the direction of the cave. I strained my eyes against the night to see what it was. A small child crawled out of the cave. Her face was covered in dirt and mud, and her hair was frizzy, and it looked like it hadn't been brushed in some time. Her small eyes darted back and forth until they rested upon me. "You shouldn't be here. The lady isn't seeing anyone today." Her voice sounded robust and mature. Her words hit me like a blow in the stomach. I had not heard anyone speak such flawless English since I'd arrived. Most Filipinos spoke with an American accent, but this girl sounded like a native speaker from London. "I've travelled all this way to see her, and I'll not leave until I do," I said with a sense of arrogance. How dare this little brat tell me that I couldn't see the faith healer, I thought angrily. The girl walked towards me. Her eyes seemed to be glowing in the moonlight, and she looked at me with hatred. "How dare you make demands of the lady?" Suddenly she fell silent, and her head snapped back towards the cave. Her mouth started moving as she talked with some unseen person, but no words could be heard. She turned back to me and looked me over closely. "The lady said she'll see you now, foreigner," she said mockingly. The young girl turned and beckoned me to follow her. She got down on her hands and knees and crawled into the amber glow. I hesitated for a moment, thinking maybe I'd made a huge mistake. No, I'd come all this way to see the old crone. I needed to go. Kneeling down, I started to crawl. The sharp stones bit painfully into my hands and knees. I cursed the woman under my breath as I made my way deeper into the cave. The small cave opened into a large room, and across from me sat an old woman. Her fuzzy grey hair poked out in every direction. It seemed to rebel from lying straight, and deep wrinkles creased her brow. I'd never seen someone with so many lines on their face. She smiled at me as I stood up, dusting myself off. Her pink gums were dotted all over with dark spots, and several of her teeth were gone, and the remaining ones were black and rotten. The old woman's eyes were a deep brown colour, and they looked like those little flecks of silver dancing inside as they reflected the firelight. She started to walk over towards me. She paused and looked me over from head to toe. A frail hand reached out and touched my face. It was hot to the touch. I almost recoiled in pain, but I had a feeling that if I did that would be a very bad thing to do. She started speaking. I had no idea what she was saying. The girl was standing next to the old woman, and she started to stiffen. Her eyes rolled backwards into her head. The whites were the only thing that could be seen. Once again, a strong English accent boomed out of the little girl's frame. "You are sick. That's why you came here, right?" At this point, I burst out in laughing. I was in my 20s, fit, and I'd never been sick a day in my life. "That's funny, old woman. I'm perfectly fine. I was curious to see a faith healer. That's all. Now I know it's a scam." My arrogance got the better of me. How dare this scammer try to rip me off, I thought. The young girl started to chuckle as the old woman's hand moved from my face to the top of my head. There was a sharp burst of pain as she ripped several hairs out of my scalp. "What the hell are you doing, you old bit?" I was cut off as she pulled a small doll out of her dress. This doll inspired a fear in me that I'd never felt before. Something dark radiated from it. I could feel the coldness of it sinking into my skin as she held it tight in her old wrinkly hand. She took one strand of my hair and wrapped it around the doll's neck. Her mouth moved in a wordless prayer as she tied it with the hair. I started to feel a gentle pressure around my neck. It was ever so subtle, I thought. Maybe I was imagining it. Her mouth moved faster. The pressure increased. I couldn't breathe. My eyes started to roll back into my head. My fingers clawed at my throat. I was desperate to breathe. No matter what I did, I just couldn't get the air into my lungs. She loosened the pressure of the hair off the doll's neck, and air rushed back into my lungs as I started to cough and gasp for air. Little man, who do you think you are? Do you think you're better than us Filipinos? You're nothing. The little girl's voice mocked me. A small silver needle appeared into the old woman's hand, almost like magic. She started tracing it across the ragdoll's leg. It looked like it was on fire. I could feel it scratching my leg as it moved upwards and down. The old woman's face flashed a sickly toothy grin, and in one fluent motion, the needle disappeared into the doll's right knee. I didn't feel the pain straight away, but my legs buckled under me as I crashed hard against the stone floor. A sharp jolt of electricity flared up my leg and radiated through my entire being. I had never felt anything like it before. I could feel the needle sticking out of my leg. The old woman's eyes never left mine. She started moving the needle in small circles. I could feel it scraping the bone inside my knee. It caused a disgusting grinding sound as she moved the needle up and down. The little girl walked over to me. She was smiling. She had the same damn twisted smile as the Mangkukulam. I screamed in pain, but that only seemed to feed the old woman's hatred and malice towards me. She walked away slowly and headed towards the fire. The Mangkukulam turned her head back to me, and the amber light danced in her eyes as she lowered the doll towards the flame. One of its little arms burst into flame as the fire flickered along the cotton. I could feel it. She was trying to burn me alive. The skin on my arm faded from white to a light brown before it turned black. The skin started to crack and peel as she burnt the doll. You're gonna die here. The little girl's words stung my ears. No, please God, no. Forgive me, please God. I begged and I begged. There is no God here. Beg me for your forgiveness. The girl laughed. Please, forgive me, please. I'm sorry, forgive me, I pleaded. The doll started moving away from the flame. Its little cotton arm was stained black and smoldered. Smoke was still clinging to the rag doll, not wanting to let go of its prisoner. She pulled the hair from the doll's neck and she threw the rag doll at me. I closed my eyes, waiting for a new pain to come, but thankfully, it never did. Be gone and get out of my sight. Foreigners like you make me sick. If you don't leave the Philippines in a week, you'll die, she chuckled. Snatching up the doll, I shoved it into my pocket. Scrambling to my feet, the old woman started laughing, and she held up the remaining strands of hair. The next day, I was on a plane back to Manila, and Siquijor disappeared like a bad memory. As the plane's wheels squelched as it arrived at Terminal 3, I knew that I had to run for my life to make it to the international terminal at Naia. Sadly, I missed my connecting flight. According to the travel agent, no more flights were available to fly back home for several days. I was desperate, and I begged and pleaded for the travel agent to book me a ticket anywhere. Thankfully, there was a seat on Thai Airlines for a flight to Bangkok. As I sat on the plane, my arm started to ache. It was still stained black from the old woman. I knew in my heart I would never be able to use that arm properly again. It was a gift from the old woman for my arrogance. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's lullaby. If you enjoy my content, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, dear viewer, keep watching for what's in the dark.